Hello, future doctor. This is Sam, and welcome to another episode of the MCAT Master Interview Series, where it is my job to extract the MCAT study strategies, habits, prep material, and so on of top scorers on the MCAT. My guest today is Dan Green. Dan, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
So Dan scored a 520 on the MCAT, and when there was just a month left before his exam date, he was scoring a 506, which means in just about 30 days, Dan managed to increase his MCAT score by 14 points. So I hope you're excited, because in this interview, we're going to be learning all about his journey and how he studied, how he managed to improve his score so quickly, and what his biggest strategies and takeaways were from this experience. So without further ado, if you're ready, Dan, let's begin.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, great. So I want our listeners to get to know you a little bit. So if you could just start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself, and be sure to throw in a little bit of an interesting fact for us.
Yeah, definitely. So like you said, my name is Dan. I'm a senior at IU Bloomington. And I'm studying, so this is pretty interesting. I'm a dual degree student, but I'm in the business school, actually. So I have a major in business economics and a major in medical science and society. And that second thing is something that I actually made my own. They have an individualized major program at IU. So I was able to work with a couple professors and just kind of craft like a more well-rounded pre-med major in that. And this year I helped start an organization at the business school that's designed to help equip guys to be better peers and better allies to their female peers at the business school. It's called Men as Allies. So that's a pretty cool thing. And then I'm interested in soccer, Indiana basketball, and student government.
Nice. Interesting. Wow, there's a lot there. So you decided to do a business major, and then what inspired you towards going the pre-med route?
Well, so I've always wanted to be a doctor because I think it gives me an opportunity to help people in a very tangible way, in a very personal way. I don't want to do something that helps people, indirectly, several, degrees removed from them. I'd rather really help someone directly. So I just did business. I did business because I thought it'd be an interesting approach toward medicine. But really I have always been on this pre-med track, at least in my mind.
Nice. So if you could describe the MCAT in one word, what would that be?
So I would say it's intimidating.
All right.
I think so many people, especially me, I approached it with, here's like one shot, kind of prove myself, etc. So, I mean, anything where you're studying for multiple months before it happens, and then you have one day to kind of make it count is intimidating.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would agree with you on that one. It's definitely intimidating. And I think a lot of it does come down to mindset and how you deal with that, with the fear and the intimidation.
Yeah.
So where were you before you kind of began prepping for the MCAT? Like, what was going on in your, just in your life in general, in your mind? Like, what was your kind of situation there?
Yeah, so I'd actually, it's December now, so I took the MCAT in August of this past year. And I began studying in May, just, at the end of my junior year. So one thing that was helpful, I think, is that I had done 3 years of undergrad already, so I'd kind of developed some study strategies, and I'd taken a lot of the pre-med courses already, which was really effective because by the time I started studying, a lot of things I was looking at I was reviewing instead of learning for the first time. So that was really helpful. But then in May started studying, and took a couple months to study and then took the test.
Did you have any other obligations at the time? Were you working?
Yeah, so I was, I had a research internship at IU School of Medicine, probably about 30 hours a week. So not a ton, but my general kind of plan would be to spend 30 hours a week, at the lab doing stuff, but then also, 20-ish hours studying for the MCAT.
So do you think that kind of time arrangement worked out for you? Or if it was somebody else, like you would recommend, go full time with the MCAT? Or would you say you can have a balance in your life with a job and study for the MCAT?
Yeah, I think you definitely can have a balance. And I think, obviously I can only speak to my experience,
Right.
but I think for me it helped because it would have been difficult to, start, several months beforehand, and work full time at the MCAT all summer, because I really think it would have kind of drained me mentally. But having the ability to, get up, go, work for a little bit, do some other stuff, come back, take an hour break, and then, sit down and do, 5 or 6 hours of MCAT study, and in the evening, I think really helped. So doing 4 to 5 hours a day, I think was more helpful than doing, 7 or 8 or 9 hours a day for a shorter period of time.
Interesting. Okay, that's good to know. So when you began studying for the MCAT, what was your goal in terms of your score, and how did you come up with that?
So I didn't really know a ton about the MCAT when I started. So I just kind of picked 510 because that's like about 90th percentile. So
Right.
I was like, oh, that sounds like pretty good. 90th percentile sounds good. Additionally, IU Med School has like an early kind of decision program, and you have to have at least a 509 to be accepted to that. So that was, that 509, 510 area was my goal.
Wow. So you really surpassed your goal.
Yeah. I did.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. So you've taken the MCAT once, is that right?
Yeah, just this past time in August.
All right. And did you ever postpone the MCAT at any time, or did you stay within the initial date?
No, I stayed within the date that I'd set. I think everyone probably has a moment where they're like, oh wow, I should probably postpone. Or I should look at like doing it another time.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that I didn't.
But did you have that feeling as well that should I postpone kind of thing?
Yeah, I definitely did.
How did
But
you
it was
deal with
probably
that?
like it was a little more of like a jitter, probably, right? So
Right.
I've been studying for a couple months, and then like a couple weeks before the test, I was like, wow, I am like not ready. I still have 3 or 4 of these AAMC full lengths to do. So
Right.
I wish I just had another month or something.
Wow.
But I think that was more just in my head, kind of psyching myself out. So I really don't think that I needed that extra time.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I didn't act on it.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so what would you say were your biggest challenges, roadblocks, struggles that you experienced throughout your MCAT journey, and how did you overcome them?
Well, for me, it was staying disciplined. That was tough, I think, since I studied it for the summer. And, like I said, I'd work maybe 30 hours a week. So not every day was I like, oh, I really want to study,
Right.
especially since it was summer, like other people had things going on, going to the beach, things like that. So
Right.
it was sometimes difficult to stay disciplined and on task. So the way that I overcame that was just planning. So I sat down probably at the middle of May, and I was like, I put on my calendar what I plan to do every day until the test, and that was really helpful. I was able to, every couple of weeks, I would kind of change that up to see where I was, see what I needed to do still, to change the schedule as I needed to. But it was helpful to, from the very beginning, have a plan, which was also nice because it made it, in my mind at least, look manageable, right? Because I can see it all in front of me on the paper. So I think that probably took away a little of the intimidation factor.
So did you have a particular strategy that you used to come up with your MCAT study plan?
Yeah, so I'd read on the MCAT Reddit, the subreddit for the MCAT, that you should look at your reviewing first and then start like practicing. And I
Mm,
also got some ideas from that from the MCAT Mastery Top Scorer Guide.
right.
Just as idea, you should review first and then practice.
Yeah.
So I just I put down all of the things that I wanted to review through Khan Academy. I guess that's also one thing that is useful about my study is that I didn't do a class. I self-studied.
Wow.
So
Okay.
I probably spent $250 on taking the test, on all the materials and stuff. So
Hmm.
for the first like month or so, I just did Khan Academy, for 20 hours a week or so, and reviewed that. And then I started working in like a full length, and just doing like UWorld. They have some like practice problem stuff, so using that to review. And then as the exam got closer, I, maybe 2 weeks out, I would, take a full length on day one. And then on day two, I would just spend the whole day reviewing the test, which was really helpful. And then that third day, I would spend some time reviewing things that I missed from the previous test, or just, kind of preparing. And then on day four, I would take another full length. And then this 4 day, this 3 day cycle, I guess, would kind of just repeat, really for the 3 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks before the test.
And you feel like that time period really helped you?
Yeah, I feel like it did. We may get into this, in another question,
Right. Yeah.
but one of the biggest things that I think, one of the most useful things is practicing,
Mm,
instead of, looking at content review and content review over and over again. That's
hmm.
helpful. But what's more important even than knowing the science, I think, is being able to take the exam.
Hmm.
Because you could know the science, but if you're not familiar with the exam format or the questions and stuff, you may not get the right answer.
Yeah.
Or you could also, not know as much of the science, but understand the exam well and still find the right answer.
Right. Right.
So I think it was really important to understand the exam through practice questions and really looking at practice questions that are similar to the AAMC exam.
Yeah.
So whether it's from AAMC themselves, or I also thought that next step exams were pretty helpful.
Right.
So yeah, those things were good.
Yeah, I love your point that you could know all of the science and still struggle with finding the right answer. Or you could not have a full grasp of the science, but understand how to take the exam and more often than not, find the right answer. We often get students who are just frustrated that they know all the content, they know all the material, but none of that is being reflected in the scores that they're getting. And our response is always that you need to learn how to approach the MCAT specifically. It's not like regular undergrad exams that you're used to.
Yeah,
And that's when they use our strategies and see their scores jump.
yeah, I think that's good advice.
Yeah, so your lowest score, that was a
Yeah,
506, right?
yeah, it was at 506.
Okay, so first of all, that's a higher than normal score that most pre-meds get on their diagnostic. Normally, people score much below 500, so why do you think your score was so relatively high?
So I think my first test was a 510.
Mm, okay.
So I actually got a 510 on my first test, but my second test a 506.
Mm-hmm.
I think part of the reason why I got a 510 on the first one was because I didn't know you couldn't use a calculator, so I
Right.
used a calculator on the first one. So probably some error in there,
Mm,
but I think it was as high as it was, that 506 being my lowest, just because I think I'd seen a lot of the stuff before. Also, I'd spent a lot of time reviewing before I started a practice exam.
right.
Um, I'd been doing content review for at least like 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably why I would say most people would probably, I would guess most people take a diagnostic at the beginning of their study,
Yeah.
which it probably has value, but I felt like I should just spend as much time. Well, I was actually worried that doing that would like discourage me,
Oh,
taking,
interesting.
before I started doing anything, taking a diagnostic, maybe getting, like you said, like a 495. I think more than anything else, it would have discouraged me. So, spending enough time to study and have a decent foundation on the science helped me, I think, get, a 506, which is a pretty, a decent
Yeah.
lowest score.
Yeah, that's interesting. We've not heard that perspective before, and I think it's valuable because a lot of it is mindset, like we said, and a lot of it is motivating yourself to study, and even especially if you're
Yeah.
self-studying. So if you feel discouraged, which a lot of people do when they take their diagnostic, I wonder how it affects your performance while you're going through MCAT prep. So that's something interesting to think and talk to people about.
hmm Yeah,
Um,
I think it's probably something that everyone personally should look at in themselves and be like, okay, if I get a bad score, is this likely to discourage me? And in
right.
that case, maybe it makes sense not to do a diagnostic. But for other people, I could easily see it encouraging them.
Yeah.
Kind of being okay. I have a lot of grant to make. So I got to work. Blah 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 blah.
Yes. Yeah,
So I think it just
definitely.
depends on your personality.
Yeah, agreed, definitely. Okay, so you did manage to increase your score to a 520 from that 506. How did you make that happen, and what advice would you have for somebody who wants to achieve a similar score increase?
So I mentioned that a little bit earlier, but
Right.
using that, by that time I had been doing this kind of, day one, take a full length, day two, review it, day three, kind of review the things that I missed, the concepts, and then day four, take another test. So that cycle, I did for a month to 3 weeks, I think.
Right.
So that was helpful because it really exposed me to a ton of different questions. Um, so, I mean, I think that's probably the best way to review is is well, actually, I would say that you should probably start practice tests before you think you need to, um,
Mm,
because as you're doing the practice questions, you're still doing review. You're still reviewing the content, but
right.
you're just doing it in the context of the question.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is helpful. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think something that's important to note is that on my full lengths, I mentioned I got a 510, a 506, I think a 508, and then a 512, and then a 514.
Mm,
So I got a 514 like 3 or 4 days before I took the exam, but then ended up getting a 520. So,
nice.
so I guess the lesson is it all matters what you do on the test day.
Right.
You could increase your score a lot, and you could probably. I think it's probably more likely that you increase your score a lot rather than decrease your score a
Mm-hmm.
lot. Um, just because I think for me personally, it was just a tough exam. I think a lot of people had trouble with it. I'm guessing. So I think
Yeah.
I relatively did well compared to other people.
Right.
But that's going to happen. I guess you need to be prepared for that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I attribute my big score increase from 506 to 520 mostly to looking at practice questions, exposing myself to a ton of different questions, and then um, just showing up on exam day.
Yeah. I'm worried that people who aren't ready for practice tests yet will kind of listen to this interview and will be like, okay, my score hasn't been improving, so I'm just going to start doing practice exams. And that might be right for them. But at what point do you determine if your MCAT content review is finished and when to start with the practice exam kind of marathon like you did? Should it be time based like a month before, or should it be like kind of you need to feel it out for yourself?
Well, what I used for myself was basically by the time I started doing practice tests, I had seen everything like once, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I hadn't spent a ton of time practicing like acid-base chem reactions, but I'd seen it in class a couple years ago, and I'd reviewed it just on a Khan Academy video. So it was in my mind.
Right.
Um, so for personally me, looking at everything, seeing most things like once, going through almost all that Khan Academy MCAT video tutorial, like that whole list of videos.
Mm-hmm.
Once I finished that, I was like, okay, my review's done. Anything else that is going to be reinforced more, I will just get in the practice questions. But
Mhm.
but that's why it was also nice to be able to use the UWorld practice questions, because they're a lot harder than the actual AAMC questions. So
Mhm.
by kind of using that as a bridge between content review and practice questions, I was able to get in the feeling of doing practice questions, but still reviewing content, because it was very challenging. Another thing that was helpful is that I would do a practice test and I would look at every single question, every single answer to every question, and look at not only what was the right answer, but also what was the wrong answer. Um,
Right.
to look at why I was wrong, but also even just to look at the vocabulary, or the terms or something, like especially psych and socials. That's huge.
Right.
Um, so I ended up keeping a notebook of all of the questions that I missed, and then all of the, like, why I missed them, and then also all of the, like, the terms that were part of a question, that I could then just review basically every time, before I took an exam.
Nice. Wow. A lot of great tips there that a lot of people listening will be able to take advantage of. So thank you for that. So you did mention that you used Khan Academy, Next Step, UWorld. Were there any other prep materials that you used that you would give your highest recommendations to?
Um, yeah, so a couple different things. I mentioned Khan Academy, which is nice because it's free.
Mm-hmm.
The U World, I think you can do a thing where it's like for 60 days or something, it's free. But if you start that, soon enough before your test, you'll get it for free.
Right.
Also, the MCAT subreddit was helpful, just to hear people's strategies. But it was especially helpful before I found the MCAT Mastery, top scorer strategy guide,
Mm-hmm.
because I was like looking at all these things and I was like, sure, there's practice questions and content review, but I didn't really have anything about strategy for approaching the exam.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I really wanted that. So the MCAT subreddit gave me some of that, but then also having the top scorer strategy guide helped me to just look at how to approach the exam, and different sections of the exam and stuff. So I thought that was helpful. And
Yeah,
then
makes
and then of course the AAMC materials.
Yeah, we stand behind the recommendation of all those resources. We've heard good things, and if anyone's interested in downloading or learning more about the Top Scorer MCAT Strategy Guide, we've included a link to it in the description or show notes. Okay, so looking at your scorecard, it looks like your strongest sections were Psych and Soc and Cars, where you scored a 131 in both of them. How did you study for those sections, and what advice would you have for anybody who is struggling with either one of those sections?
Yeah, so you mentioned my stronger sections were cars and psych and soc.
Right.
Um, for for cars, honestly, that was never really a big issue for me.
Hmm.
I'm not sure why. I think I don't know, but and it was always one of my higher scores. So
Hmm.
kind of as my other scores increased, my cars did as well. So I didn't really ever have to spend a ton of extra time on cars, which was really helpful. And I know
Hmm.
it's unique. Um, so I'm sorry, I don't have a ton of advice for people struggling with cars.
That's okay.
Um, yeah, I think the one advice that I can give is just take your time reading the passages. I sit down for a passage. I would just read it all. I'd take. I think I for cars especially, I focused on like timing.
Hmm.
So I think I had maybe 10 minutes per like passage and question. So I'd spend, maybe 5 to 6 minutes or 5 minutes looking at the passage, and then 5 minutes looking at the questions. And I also didn't underline things or anything like that, which of course you can do, but
Yeah.
but I don't think you need to. So that's my advice on cars. But with
Hmm.
with psych and soc, that was something that I definitely had to build upon.
Hmm.
That started out as one of my lowest sections.
Oh.
Um, so that was probably my biggest increase was in psych and soc, just just because of the sheer volume of terms and things in that section. So
Mhm.
that is where keeping that notebook of missed terms was super helpful.
Right. Nice. So, what about your weakest section? What happened there? And same thing, what advice would you have for somebody who is struggling in that particular section?
Yeah, so my weakest section is chem and physics,
Mhm.
which I got a 128 on. So still did pretty well in, but that was also something that I was not surprised when I saw that was my lowest score.
Mm.
Um, just because I think I don't know, for some people it's more mathematical,
Mm.
which for some people is is tricky. For me, I think it was. Um, and what was super helpful with increasing that section was UWorld and Khan Academy. Because, coming into study, it was my weakest subject. So UWorld, just being able to drill the content um, in practice question style was really helpful.
Mm. So, if you were to rewrite the MCAT and study for it again, how would your approach to ChemPhys be different this time, or would it be any different?
Um, See, the thing is, like, on the questions, they're not like super in-depth questions generally.
Right.
It's just like, one question about, okay, what's the wavelength of this thing?
Mm-hmm.
So I think what I would do if I could do it again, if I would just spend more time practicing, in developing my like speed in those
Mm-hmm.
sections, because that was the section that I was definitely the most strapped for time in. Most of the other sections I had time to go back and check things if I wanted to, but Chem
Mm-hmm.
and Phys usually I didn't. I would kind of just finish right under the time.
Yeah.
So developing my like timing, something else that I did, I think that was helpful, that I discovered shortly before the exam. I think I actually got it from the top scorer strategy guide, was to look just to recognize that a lot of my like simple mistakes could be in like math things. So I
Mm-hmm.
would circle all the ones that involve math, and then
Mm-hmm.
if I had time to check any, I would just check the ones that involve math. I would just go back and check the actual calculations were correct, since that was the easiest place to make a mistake, but then also to check quickly.
Yeah, makes sense. I think from the top scorers that we've interviewed, when it comes to ChemPhys, they recommend that and practice in general isn't recommended for the entire MCAT, but when it comes to the sciences, practice for ChemPhys
Yeah,
the most important. So for
yeah,
anybody listening who's struggling with that section, a lot of practice will be really helpful.
yeah.
So there's a lot of anxiety that surrounds this exam in general, which I'm sure you know about and you've experienced. I wanted to ask you about the test day itself. How were you feeling? Were you dealing with any anxiety, and how did you deal with that kind of state of mind?
So it was a lot for me because I'm really not a very anxious person.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't get like test like jitters or frights usually. But the evening before, I think the test was at like 7 or something, like 7:30. So I was going to get up at 6. I was going to get up at 6:30, I think, or 6, and then you know take a shower, or whatever. Drive 20 minutes to the test and do that and get there early and such. But so I went to sleep. I tried to go to sleep at like 10. So I was probably in bed trying to sleep by 9:30.
Yeah.
And I never have trouble sleeping.
Right.
But I just could not get to sleep. I guess I was just thinking about the test. So, like an hour went by just sitting, and obviously as I'm sitting there, it's getting
Mm-hmm.
worse because
Yeah.
I'm being like, okay, I'm now at this point where like it's 11 p.m. I'm gonna get like 7 hours of sleep. I'm not gonna be able to do well. So I just like freaking out really. I ended up having to actually drink like a glass of wine just to kind of you know put on or get some sleep going. So I didn't
Yeah.
actually I didn't actually go to sleep till like 12 or 12:30. I don't think.
Wow. Yeah.
Um, which which was I woke up the next morning and I was like, okay, like I was almost like, okay, well, so there goes that. Like I'm walking in here, I got like 5.5 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to do well. And I was almost like accepting my fate.
Right.
But I got up test day, had breakfast and stuff, got there. And I think maybe that was helpful because I was just like, all right, I'm going to go in there and do my best. Who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah.
So, and it ended up going well. So,
Yeah, it sounds like you were able to use the excuse of not getting enough sleep to detach from the outcome and just put your mind at ease.
yeah, I think that's possible. Yeah.
So during the actual exam itself, did you have a particular kind of strategy that you were using to manage your time, or did you kind of just go with the flow kind of thing?
So for the most part, I just kind of went with the flow. The only section that I had like a timing place where I was like, okay, at this time I need to be at this question, etc., was for cars, just to be able to pace myself. But really, the other sections I didn't. For chem, I just kind of did as much as I could. I usually finished like a couple minutes before it was done. For bio, I usually finished like 10 minutes before. So that gave me some time to check if I wanted to. And then on the psych soc, I probably finished like 20 minutes before it went up. So also having some time to check through that was helpful.
Were there any questions that you missed or had to guess on? And if you came across a situation like that, what was your thought process in how you'd deal with not knowing the answer?
I think I definitely, thinking about it, there are definitely some that I missed. But one thing that I do remember is that some things, especially in psych soc, were just like hard. So I was actually thinking to myself, okay, this is harder than the practice tests have been. So, but it's also harder for everyone. So just recognizing that I needed to do my best, just because it really just matters what I do relatively to other people.
Nice.
So just being like self-aware, I guess, in that way is just like not freaking myself out because this exam is hard, just acknowledging that it's hard for everyone. So just kind of being in that mindset was helpful.
Yeah, that's a great mindset. Like that's a great way to keep yourself focused, I think, and keep yourself. That's great. Thank you. So I do want to be respectful of your time. I just have 2 more questions and you can keep them brief if you want. So the first one is for all the people who are just burnt out right now and struggling and really having a hard time in their MCAT prep, what would you say to them as like a mentor or an older brother? And actually in general, what last minute advice would you have for somebody who's going to write the MCAT really soon?
Yeah. So I think, especially those who are feeling burned out or frustrated, if you have time, just take a break. Whether that, depending on your schedule, whether that's for, a few hours or a day or even a couple days, I think it can be really helpful to, take a break, just take your mind off of it as much as you can, and then approach it refreshed and determined and committed to just attack it when you get back studying again. So just recognizing that you can't, right, in a race, you can't sprint the whole distance. If it's a marathon, which I think this exam is a marathon. So you really have to pace yourself and recognize that, really be okay with taking a break, in knowing that by taking a break, you're allowing yourself to do better when you actually are studying.
Right.
So don't be afraid to take a break, I think.
Right. Yeah, that's great. I think people who are studying for the MCAT are usually reluctant to taking a break because they feel like if they're not putting in time studying, then they're wasting time. But in fact, taking a break, I look at it as like time invested, and
Hmm.
you're rejuvenating yourself, and when you go back you're that much more able to study well and have your brain at its optimal potential to actually do the work.
Hmm.
And lastly, what are your plans for the future now that you've gotten such a great MCAT score? What does the short and long term future look like for you?
Yeah, so probably a little unusual, but I'm graduating in May, and then
Mm-hmm.
in July I'm starting a healthcare consulting job
Mm-hmm.
in Chicago. So I'm excited about that because I'll be a consultant for hospitals, working for a small firm, and so that'll be really fun because it'll give me a chance to learn from people from a business perspective, but who also have a lot of deep knowledge of the healthcare landscape.
Mm-hmm.
So, ideally, I took the exam in August, so it'll last like 3 years, right? So, hopefully, going to work for like a year, and then next summer I would start applying to med school. So I do plan to go to med school, but I do want to, if I can, take a couple years to make some money and just get a different perspective on the healthcare landscape. And I really think that'll help me once I become a doctor.
Nice. That sounds really interesting. And yeah, good luck
Yeah,
with
thank
that.
you.
Well, this has been great. We're really trying to make this stressful period for MCAT writers as smooth as possible. And the fact that you're taking time out to share your insights means a lot. So thank you again, Dan. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm happy to help.
Yeah. So once again, congratulations on your great score. We wish you all the best in your journey to the white coat. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Sam. Have a good day.
Good luck. Thanks. So, quick note before we end. After this interview, Dan sent me an email saying that there was something important to him that he forgot to mention in this interview and asked if I could read it out. So, here it is, a personal message from Dan to you. There's one thing that's important to me that I forgot to mention. To anyone taking the MCAT, this exam does not define you. My high score or someone else's low score does not define who we are as people. At the end of the day, your MCAT score is exactly that, just a test score. Earning a low score on the exam does not mean you aren't a very smart person or that you aren't good enough. It just means you need to reassess your study plan and try again. A person's life is so much more than just this one exam score. Don't give this test more of your life than it deserves. Hey, this is Sam again, and before you go, I hope that whenever you face those moments during MCAT prep where you're feeling discouraged, frustrated, or doubtful of yourself and your abilities, you remember Dan's words that your low MCAT score does not define who you are. It defines your MCAT study process. So if you're worried because you've been trying to improve your MCAT score and it's not working, if you're struggling to get your score over the 500 or 505 mark, or if you're rewriting for the second or even third time, remember that you simply need to change your approach and your process. The problem is most students don't know how to change their process. Some try to improvise it on their own, others take generic cookie cutter advice from other people or overpriced companies, and barely anyone ends up getting any significant improvement. We realized that the most logical and the most smartest way to improve your study process would be to compare your current MCAT process to a proven template, to the proven MCAT study methods of those who have already succeeded on the MCAT with 90+ percentile scores. Because then you can look at what you're doing and what they did, so it becomes crystal clear what you need to stop doing that's holding your score down, and exactly what you need to do to add to your MCAT prep that can raise your score up. This is how you develop the perfect MCAT study process customized for your own strengths and weaknesses. But again, to do this, you need to have the top scorer MCAT study methods to compare your current methods to. Luckily, you'll find all of that and more in the top scorer MCAT strategy guide that Dan used and mentioned earlier in this interview. There's nothing like this that exists, and that's exactly why so many pre-meds who download it see their scores jump by 10 points or more in less than 30 days. So if you're interested or if you want to see more reviews, we'll have a link for you in the description. And lastly, if you like this interview, be sure to click the subscribe button so you can be notified when we release the next MCAT Master interview. And as always, thanks for listening. Good luck with your MCAT prep. You got this.